Welcome back. This is Dr. Seymour with the Optimal Response Initiative, ORI. Stay alert, stay alive, and thrive. The training continues. In this episode, I discuss dopamine, a molecule in the brain and body that greatly influences levels of motivation. When dopamine levels are high, we are energized, believe we can do what we need to do, we have high self-efficacy, and highly focused on gaining something that we need or want, from basic needs such as water and food to healthy needs, objectives, and goals. However, dopamine does not have a preference whether what we are pursuing is healthy or not. It is up to us, with the help of our brains, such as the prefrontal cortex and some other areas, to implement our power to choose our response to our felt needs, desires, goals, pursuits, and passions. In my last episode, Optimal Extremes, I discussed many ORI continuum response lines. However, I purposely left out a few. The ORI continuum response line between pain, the pain of not having, and to gain, to getting, as well as the ORI continuum response line between isolation and connection. And third, the ORI continuum response line between faith, believing, and action, moving towards that which we believe and taking action toward it. I previously did not discuss these ORI continuum response lines because I wanted to discuss dopamine and its role in relation to them, as well as highlight that which we can do, taking action to leverage dopamine for our optimal good, not our demise. And to specifically do this by discussing how ORI tools already do just that, via taking action to do no less than 2 things a day to fill up each ORI health tank: our physical, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and social health tanks. Personally and professionally, I continually observe that the simplest things can be the most profound, and that often we ignore that which we already know or have heard a million times, missing the fact that knowing and doing are 2 separate things. We can know we need to do something, but if we don't know what the helicopter we need or can do, and if we know but never take action, that knowledge is useless. It can also be worse than useless. It can be detrimental, because if we know but we don't act upon that which we know, that knowledge can be used to drill sergeant the self into feeling less and less worthy or capable of taking action to go and get that which we need, want, and desire for our good and the good of others. And the longer this goes on, the worse we feel, the more socially isolated. I put in parentheses SI for socially isolated, because these 2 letters often refer to something else that is much more catastrophic. The longer this goes on, the worse we feel, and the more socially isolated, SI, we become. And I must make a powerful point. I truly believe that many of our sisters and brothers in arms are ending their lives because they believe they are caught between 2 extremes, not realizing that there is an ORI continuum response line for everything, otherwise known as there are many optimal responses between those extremes. And thriving training is as critical to the mission as training for the mission itself. When one is stuck believing that they have to choose, however, between going big and living, or taking themselves out, not living, the idea of suicide, SI, another 2 words, the first 2 I mentioned was social isolation, SI. The more and more that goes on, it can lead to suicidal ideation, SI. This may be considered when people are stuck believing that they must choose to either keep sucking it up and pressing on living, or ending the pressing in to live, to the flip of that, which is suicide. I am on a mission to train every active duty service member and veteran to stay alert, stay alive, and thrive. And for those of you who don't have the Optimal Response Initiative workbook, I wanted to read the back of the book, because this is really my main motivation for creating a tangible workbook that you could get something in your hand, no matter where you are and who you are, what time of day it is, to get some tools and some hope. The back of the workbook reads, day-to-day service is demanding and rewarding. It's even more rewarding when you have the support that you need. All too often, however, I know that this is not the case. In the name of being hua and tough and able to endure and always adapt and overcome, one is not invited, nor do they feel compelled to discuss any of their difficulties. During service, we are taught about military history, the military code of justice. We are taught how to lock and load, fire, and clean weapons. We are taught how to run hard and run fast. We are trained to survive when the stakes are high. However, we are not necessarily taught to thrive during our active duty days or the days that follow. 3 times as many service members who have been killed at war are ending their lives when they return home. Why is it that our best men and women are serving and serving well, only to return home to an overwhelming sense of hopelessness, doubt, and loneliness? I believe it is in part because warriors are trained to fight for freedom, but warriors are not trained to fight for their own lives and thrive upon their return. Therefore, ORI is written for all of you, active duty service members and veterans, in order that you would receive the tools required to survive and thrive during your active duty career and beyond. I wrote ORI to provide some tools and create a structure from which a foundation of stability can be experienced within. It is a workbook full of ways to cope, ways to think, manage pressure, and respond in optimal ways, even in and especially in the least optimal situations of life. Leave no man or woman behind starts with you today. So in this episode, my goal is to drill home that which you can take action to move from pain to gain and isolation to connection. So that instead of living in the extreme of all or none thinking, go big or go home, you can go big for health, quality of life at home and for home, today, next week, and the rest of your optimal life. So welcome back to the Optimal Response Initiative, ORI. Stay alert, stay alive, and thrive. The training continues. So let's talk about these continuum response lines that I didn't talk about last time. There is an ORI continuum response line for everything. Between pain and gain, we must recognize that effort is required. I want to touch on the basics of dopamine. The basics of dopamine matter. This is great news about your ORI health tanks. You see, once you set a long-term destination goal for your physical, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and social health tanks, and if you are doing 2 things a day to fuel each tank, then you have the dopaminergic fuel, the physiological fuel that you need to thrive. ORI health tanks must be filled if you want to do more than merely survive. Sleep is critical, sunlight, nutrition, and movement. We need to move out in the same way when we are thriving as when we were surviving. The basics of dopamine matter, and I could say it a million times. ORI health tanks must be filled if you want to do more than merely survive. At baseline, dopamine is released at a rate of 3 to 4 per second from the ventral tegmentum, VTA, and nucleus accumbens to the prefrontal cortex. Dopamine is your fuel. Dopamine is the pool. No, dopamine in the pool means fuel in the tanks. Dopamine is your fuel. Consistent daily actions of filling your ORI health tanks means there will be a pool of physiological fuel to pull from for the basic foundational needs, as well as for the above and beyond energy needed to create beautiful memories that we desire in our day-to-day life. 2 things a day minimum to fill your tanks means dopamine fuel is in your physiological pool. Dopamine fuel is in your physiological pool. Dopamine in the pool is a requirement whether you sit on the diving board or jump in with both feet. Nobody would tell their child, brother, sister, or best friend to go to the pool and jump off of the diving board if there was no water in the pool. None to low levels equals danger. No ounce of pretending or visualizing can fill an empty pool. Dopamine in the pool is a requirement to survive and thrive. Let's talk about dopamine on basic needs. When we realize we are thirsty or hungry, dopamine peaks a little and then automatically drops a little below baseline. Dopamine peaks above and drops below baseline throughout the day as part of our basic needs and functioning. This is experienced as discomfort, pain from not having it. As a result, the IT, capital IT, whatever it is, whether it's food, water, the goal we're working towards. As a result, there is motivation to go and get it. So when the dopamine peaks and then drops below baseline, this is discomfort. I put in parentheses in my notes, pain from not having the thing that we desire or need. As a result, there is motivation to go and get it. Moving away from the pain of not having it towards the gain on the ORI continuum response line to getting it. Let's see. So between the anticipation of wanting and getting food, dopamine release doubles from 3 to 4 to 6 to 8 per second. Afterwards, dopamine returns to baseline. So once the person engages in the amount of food that is optimal for them to feel full, dopamine returns to baseline. There is an ORI continuum response line for everything. So in regard to food, I'm also going to talk about the continuum between isolation and connection. Physiologically, the same is true with hunger for food as it is for hunger for social connection. So I'm pointing out another ORI continuum response line. And I'm saying all this to say that it's important to leverage your physiology for your good, not your demise. Pay attention to your needs. If you are hungry for food, if you are hungry for healthy social connection, take action and move towards optimally meeting those needs. Move towards optimal on the ORI continuum response line. Because if we ignore these cravings, these urges, these needs, and these are basic needs for survival. We must have food and we must have social connection to survive and thrive. If we ignore these cravings, these urges, these needs, our stomachs, our hearts, our minds, our bodies will adapt in maladaptive ways, and we will by default begin moving towards worst on the ORI continuum response line. In the same way, you got up and moved or are currently moving out, getting up and showing up at formation at 04 or 05 or 0600, whatever your time is, regardless of whether you felt like doing it or you feel like doing it, you show up. If you want to thrive versus merely survive, you need to do the same. You need to move towards meeting needs and taking action, not based solely on whether you feel like showing up for yourself or not, but because you recognize that doing hard, uncomfortable things is actually healthy and for your good. Growth and comfort don't coexist. I got that from a friend and colleague of mine. That was an anonymous quote, and I like it a lot. It's true. Growth and comfort don't coexist. People don't thrive in isolation. They thrive in connection with healthy, like-minded individuals. So this is an ORI continuum response line that is critically important to thriving, moving between isolation towards connection. Effort is required. Hunger for social connection is the same physiologically as hunger for food. Between the anticipation of wanting and getting social connection, the IT, the it, the social connection, dopamine release doubles. Afterwards, after The person engages in the amount of social connection that is optimal for them to feel full. Dopamine returns to baseline. We place meaning on our social bonds. What does it mean for us to connect with someone or a group? And what is the optimal amount of time and type of connection for us to feel full or satiated? Everyone is unique. Some need more, some need less. Social connection to feel full. But the reality is, and the truth is, that we all need social connection to thrive. Some are more extrovert, some are more introvert, but we all need social connection to not only survive, but thrive. Consider the bonds formed in the military between service members. These bonds often last a lifetime because of the deep friendships formed in service to one another through thick and thin for a purpose bigger than self, surrounded by and connected with like-minded sisters and brothers. Also, shared experience is shared physiology. Remember how you felt at boot camp, at AIT, tech school, deployment. Consider the last sporting event that you went to that you were really hyped about, the last concert, camping trip, or season in life. Whoever you were there with, you shared an experience as well as a shared physiology. It's a chemical signature of adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine, serotonin, and many more. It's been called the concert phenomenon by Dr. Andrew Huberman. When sharing a major event, such as a concert, so we're talking about a thriving event, you look over at the person next to you, and whether you know them or not, you're having a shared experience. You might smile, nod your head, and recognize that you're having a good time. Not that it took rocket science to figure that out, but you are sharing an experience and you are sharing a physiological experience as well. This creates a stronger bond. The more extreme the experience and the physiology, the stronger the bond. There is a unique chemical signature of all bonding of all kinds. Our brains and our bodies learn to modulate the chemical signature of our connections. In the same way, one can feel full or filled up with healthy connections. There is the opposite on the continuum, extreme isolation. Lack of social bonding, social isolation leads to terrible things, especially during particular contexts. Context is very important. What is the social connection, the baseline? To be surrounded with like-minded sisters and brothers 24/7. What kind of baseline does this create when we are surrounded by like-minded warriors? We also must consider, what has someone endured? What are they used to? What routines, what contexts are they used to? This creates their baseline. What is going on in their life now? Is there a major change, say from active duty to retired, from active duty to medically retired? A major change from fully connected to now out of the rhythm of active duty service, out of the rhythm of deployment to non-deployed? Is the individual supported or not supported? How do they perceive their support? Context is key, because the context of what one is used to is going to impact how they move through or not this new situation, this new sit, physically, mentally, neurochemically, the biology of social isolation. So let's talk about that. To briefly touch on the major takeaway from about 100 years of literature, being socially isolated is stressful. It's a high request and a demand for energy. Social isolation is stress on the body, even in a healthy state. So consider someone who is in a healthy state, and this individual is restricted from having the type and amount of social connection that they would prefer to have. One of the hallmark features of social isolation, SI, is chronically elevated stress hormones such as adrenaline, epinephrine, cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which is good to combat inflammation. It helps us have energy early in the day, focus throughout the day. But if cortisol is elevated for too long, which is the consequence of social isolation, SI, the immune system features and other chemicals start to be released in the brain and body that are designed to help us. They are released to help us seek out social bonds. So going back to dopamine for a moment, and let's see, I will share my screen. Share my screen. Okay, so I need visuals for myself. It helps me. So hunger for social connection is the same physiologically as hunger for food. So between anticipating, wanting, and getting the social connection, dopamine is released, and then it drops below baseline. This drop below baseline is what causes us, we feel discomfort, pain, and this discomfort, this painful discomfort, and it's not like excruciating pain. We feel it physiologically, may not notice it, but this is the ebb and flow of meeting basic needs in our day-to-day life from a physiological standpoint. We are motivated. You can think about feeling hungry for food. You want to connect with people. I mean, think about during the pandemic, people were definitely craving the social connection that they were used to because they were not getting it in the ways, the amount or the type of social connection that they were used to, and people were craving it and wanting it and needing it. So we have this craving for social connection, this need. So there's a peak in dopamine, it drops below baseline. This drop below baseline creates that motivation because of the pain and discomfort to go then and get the social connection that we desire. Once we have the type and amount of social connection that is optimal for us, and everyone's different. You might be more of an extrovert, you might be more of an introvert. So getting the type and amount of social connection that is optimal for you, this causes us to then feel satiated or full socially from our social connection. And then dopamine returns to baseline. So this is the ebb and flow of the hunger that we have for social connection. And it is the same physiologically as the hunger we have for food, the thirst we have for water. Physiologically, it is the same. Let's stop sharing my screen. So in the same way that if we are hungry and we don't seek or get food, we get used to less food. Our stomach gets smaller. Our baseline for food is less because our body adapts to less food. We've all experienced this, whether we are missing a meal for various reasons or trying to lose weight or burn fat or whatever we might be doing in thriving situations and not in survival situations as well. We know what this feels like to not have the food that you are used to. The body is going to physiologically adapt to less calories. So too does our brain and body adjust when we crave social connection. There's a release of dopamine, but if we ignore this need, We suppress, avoid our craving, our need, our desire. We ignore the release of dopamine, this peak in dopamine, AKA, we don't take action to connect. Our brain and body adjusts and gets used to less social connection. But it's not for our good. It ends up being for our demise. Here's how. For example, there is a peptide called tachykinin that is present in flies, mice, and humans. And under conditions of social isolation, its levels go up. And because of brain areas that contain receptors for tachykinin, people start feeling very aggressive and irritable due to social isolation. Why? Why is it that if you isolate an individual and then give them the opportunity for social connection, shouldn't they behave well or be glad or excited to socially connect because they are finally getting the social connection they've been longing for? Nope. Chronic isolation, social isolation, SI, changes the nature of the brain and body so that it makes social connection harder and can increase the likelihood that the person or animal is more irritable, even more aggressive, possibly. So it's important to know and understand what happens with chronic social isolation, SI, so that we can move away from worst on the ORI continuum response line. Extreme isolation, we want to move away from that and move towards optimal, healthy connections. So if you are someone who has been isolated and you are having craving for social connection, that is a healthy thing. That is your healthy human physiology being used for your good for social connection. And healthy social connections with like-minded individuals who respect one another, their uniqueness, their needs, their wants, desires, their boundaries, and are supportive in reciprocal ways is crucially important. So the type of social bonds we are making is just as important as making social connections. And the average of the 5 people you hang around. So you want those 5 people to be optimal responders, ideally, people who are working towards optimal. Now, if you really want to challenge yourself, it's great to be around people who are at higher levels than you, because then your average is going to increase. Okay. So there is an ORI continuum response line for everything. And today we're talking about moving away from pain to gain, moving away from isolation to healthy social connection. Effort is required. Now, this is kind of fun, I think. I looked up how dopamine, that neurochemical that's released and motivates us. Let's see. Sorry, maybe. So we've talked about the ORI continuums from pain to gain and isolation to connection. Effort is required, taking action is required. Let's talk about some things that influence dopamine. Dopamine on caffeine, one of my favorite things. And so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I thought this was interesting. So dopamine on caffeine. Caffeine causes an approximate doubling of dopamine release as we anticipate and drink our coffee from the VTA, the ventral tegmentum, and nucleus accumbens to the prefrontal cortex. And it doubles the amount of dopamine receptors over time, which means more receptors to receive the caffeine and take it up into the cell. That would be a good thing. The more receptors we have, the more we can take up the caffeine and experience the benefits of it for those who are into caffeine. And it doubles the receptors over time. To my knowledge, nothing else does this. Dopamine on drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Let's talk about this. So with food, so the average rate of fire for dopamine is 4 per second. So with food, this is going to double. So I did ×2. So with food, the total fires of dopamine released per second becomes 8. Caffeine is also double, as well as the benefit of doubling the amount of receptors over time as well. So that's 8 per second. Alcohol is 2 to 4 per second. So it can be anywhere from 8 to 16. So remember with dopamine, the higher dopamine is, the more energized, motivated, and happy and focused we feel to some degree. Okay. I mean, caffeine is going to help you be focused more than alcohol, maybe, or maybe. Okay, we'll just move on from that. But alcohol is 2 to 4. Definitely, it's going to increase or change mood at a rate of 8 to 16 fires of dopamine per second. Sex, anywhere of 4 to 5, all the way up to 10 or more. So that can be instead of 4 per second, it's going to be 8, between 8 and 40 per second. Video games, between 5 and 10. So the rate of fire is going to be between 20 and 40. Nicotine ×6. So that's going to be 36 per second instead of 4 per second. The music that you like, which is important. Music that you like can be anywhere from 9 to 10 times the average rate, which is 4. So instead of 4 per second, it's going to be 36 and 40 per second. Cocaine is ×100. So that's going to be 400 per second instead of 4 per second. And then meth ×1,000 or more. So you can say 4,000 per second instead of 4. Big increases in dopamine. So that's going to be a bigger spike and a sharper drop afterwards, which is important. Quick fixes lead to steep drops, crashes afterwards. Okay. Let's look at the next slide. Dr. Andrew Huberman, he's my favorite scientist. He describes addiction as a progressive narrowing of the things that give one pleasure. So while somebody who is dealing with addiction previously may have received a lot of pleasure from a lot of things in different degrees of pleasure, addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that give one pleasure. I look at addictions as never enough. So it's really a slippery slope, because just like we've talked about with dopamine for your basic needs of food and water, for example, we get a peak and then a drop. Typically, if it's something healthy like food or water, we're going to get a peak, a drop, and of course, healthy amounts of these things. And then it's going to go back to baseline. With addiction, with substances, however, substances or extreme behaviors, such as gambling, video games, anything done in extreme kind of quick fixes with intermittent rewards where you can't really determine when the award's going to show up. That is more addictive. That's why the casinos work, because you never know when it's going to strike gold. So you get with addictions or these extreme reward behaviors, you get a peak, but then it drops, and it drops instead of like a peak of 5 and a drop to 5 and then back up to 5. What happens is you get a peak of 5, it drops, say, to 10, then you get a peak of 5. So now you're at -5 instead of baseline. And then this just keeps happening. So the baseline is lowering and lowering, and it's kind of like this gradual sinking. Peak, steeper drop, and then you expected, you don't get what you expected. You might have expected this big peak back up to baseline, but you only get this little -5. You're still in the negative. So it's like you can't for the life of you get back to baseline. That's what addictions, that's what these substances, these extreme behaviors do. For me, I created this visual. It really helped me because I've always understood that there was we build a tolerance to alcohol, for example. And I don't drink for personal choice and health reasons. Nothing against anyone who drinks. Nothing against the behavior, as long as it's done in moderation. Anything more than, research is showing anything more than 1 drink a week is going to increase the likelihood of various health risks, such as cancer and cardiovascular disease, diabetes. And I got that from Andrew Huberman in his research, or reviewing the research, which I think is important to note. I'm not for or against it. I don't do it myself. Not that it matters to you. But I always understood that there was a tolerance, right? The body builds a tolerance. So as the body builds a tolerance, we need more and more of the substance to get the same result. But then there's never enough, because we are always, it's like we are continually sinking, and we can't get back to shore. We can't get back to the baseline or the edge of the pool, for example. So this visual helped me. It's like this sinking of our baseline. And then we need more and more, but we're still coming up short of getting back to baseline, let alone the high that we hope for. So it's sad. It's a vicious cycle. It's terrifying and heartbreaking for people, and physiologically, it's just horrendous, to say the least. Okay. So timing matters. Timing matters. So there's reward contingent learning. So when a substance or behavior creates a quick steep peak and a quick drop below baseline, the brain and body learns to expect a lot now with no effort required. So I want it now. And the brain and body has learned no effort, not much effort, and I get a steep peak. And I want it and need it now. The longer this goes, the worse it gets. So this is important to recognize. This is reward contingent learning. But there is hope and healing in fueling health tanks. So when we are doing 2 things a day for each tank, we can create growth in every space and place in our life and health. Let's talk about dopamine on nutrition. So from a healthy standpoint, tyrosine is an amino acid that helps the brain synthesize dopamine. It does not contain dopamine. Rather, some foods are high in tyrosine, which increases available dopamine in the brain. What kind of foods? We'll talk about those. First, let's look at antioxidants. So dopamine on nutrition, vitamin C and E serve as antioxidants. Copper, zinc, and selenium, I don't know if I'm saying that right, are minerals that serve as antioxidants. The body generates free radicals in response to environmental influence, such as tobacco smoke, ultraviolet rays, and air pollution. Free radicals are also a natural byproduct of normal cell processes. When the immune system readies itself to fight enemy invaders, the oxygen it uses spins off an armed force of free radicals that destroy viruses, bacteria, and damage body cells in an oxidative burst. So nutrition is important for fighting off disease. and also helping with health for normative movements in day-to-day life, from moving all the way to moving with more purpose, such as with exercise. Some things that can help increase dopamine levels: black beans, broccoli, cauliflower, chickpeas, kale, lentils, spinach, beef, chicken, fish, turkey, beets, artichokes, avocados, and I said beets again, actually beef and then beets. Not a fan of beef, not really a fan of beets, but maybe I should eat some beets. Okay, dopamine on nutrition. Here's more. Additionally, folate, B9, is found in many dark green leafy vegetables, as well as beans, peas, and nuts. Fruits high in folate include oranges, lemons, bananas, melons, and strawberries. Foods high in folate serve as antioxidants in the body as well, neutralizing those free radicals, thereby increasing the likelihood of dopamine synthesis. And just to remind us, movement causes exhaust from cells. Optimal nutrition helps fortify from the inside out. So additionally, exercise causes a normal production of free radicals in order to induce the physiological benefits of exercise, such as sensitizing muscle cells to insulin, which is important for health. Movement between wanting and getting effort is required. Have I said that a million times? I'll keep saying it. Even for a drink of water, we must figure out how to take action and get it. From pain to gain, effort is required. Thriving training requires movement. If you want to get what you want, expect to invest effort. The same principles that applied before you joined the military, during your military service, and now still apply today. Thriving requires that you capitalize on and redirect the momentum generated from surviving towards thriving, except now you can move from optimal pain to optimal gain. And I think I'll have t-shirts made that say it's an ORI thing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment. Easier for me to keep up with myself. And really Okay, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so the basics of dopamine matter. So if you are setting long-term destination goals for your physical, cognitive, emotional, spiritual, and social health tanks, and if you are doing 2 things a day for each tank, you have the pool of dopamine that you need to not only survive, but also thrive. And remember, we've got to pay attention to quality of sleep, content and quality of sleep. Look back at other ORI podcasts about sleep, sunlight, exposure to sunlight, nutrition, and movement, moving out towards thriving. The health tanks must be filled. You've got to have fuel if you're going to thrive in your day-to-day life. Baseline dopamine is released about 4 per second from the VTA and the nucleus accumbens to the prefrontal cortex, the area right behind our forehead, which is the executive functioning, organizing, planning, and organizing, as well as the brain system, so that we can choose our response, we can use our skills, and we cannot share every bubble that we have, every thought that we have. For example, dopamine is your fuel. Dopamine in the pool means fuel in the tanks. So consistently taking action of filling your ORI health tanks means there will be a pool of physiological fuel to pull from for basic foundational needs, as well as for the above and beyond energy needed to create beautiful memories that we desire in our day-to-day life. We've got to have fuel. We cannot run around on fumes. And this was exciting to me to recognize the power of dopamine and what we can do to take action and leverage our physiology. 2 things a day minimum to fill your tanks means dopamine fuel is in your physiological pool. Dopamine in the pool is a requirement, whether you sit on the diving board or jump in with both feet. Nobody would tell their child, brother, sister, or best friend to go to the pool and jump off the diving board if there was no water in the pool. And essentially, if we are not fueling up daily, we are running around on fumes, we don't have a tight seal on our mask. It is the equivalent to jumping into a pool with no water in it. We've got to have the physiological fuel in our tanks, our pools, to pull from on a day-to-day basis to not only survive, but also thrive. None to low levels equals danger. No ounce of pretending or visualizing can fill an empty pool. Dopamine in the pool is required to survive and thrive. So just to summarize, when we realize we are thirsty or hungry, dopamine peaks a little and then automatically drops a little below baseline. So we have this normative peak, it drops below baseline. When we get the thing that we need, water, food, in optimal amounts, then dopamine goes back to baseline. So this is the ebb and flow physiologically of dopamine for normative functioning in our day-to-day life or basic needs. So between anticipating, wanting, and getting food, dopamine release doubles from, say, 4 per second to 8 per second. Then it returns to baseline. Same is true for isolation and connection. We crave and need social connections and healthy social connections, and effort is required. So we crave a social connection because we do need it to survive and thrive. We don't serve alone. We don't deploy alone. We definitely don't thrive alone. So social isolation is a no-go for thriving. It's a no-go for surviving too. Social isolation is the enemy. So If we are craving, which is healthy to crave, we want social connection. We get a peak in dopamine, which physiologically the body's doing that anyway. So we want to pay attention. It's going to, to what degree are we isolated? To what degree are we connected on the continuum? So there's a peak, it drops below baseline. So once we engage in the amount of social connection that is optimal for us from a healthy standpoint, not from an isolated standpoint, because the more isolated we are, the more the brain and the body gets used to that isolation, and the harder and harder it is to connect. So when I say optimal for them, when we crave social connection and we engage in the amount of social connection that is optimal for us, I'm talking about optimal in a healthy state, not optimal in a worst state, a not optimal state. Because when we're isolated, the more isolated we are, the more we do that, the less we want to socially connect, the more aggressive and irritable we can become. So if you ask somebody in that state, what is optimal for you? You would say none. I don't want to be bothered. Don't answer the phone. Don't answer the door. Yeah, that's not optimal. I'm not talking about when things have gone towards worst on the continuum. I'm talking about in a healthy state, what is the type and amount of optimal social connection? So how you were before deployment, how you were before trauma, how you were before catastrophic losses, how you used to be when you could experience enjoyable things, when you were the life of the party, when you liked to be around people, you liked to be social and do things. That's what I'm talking about. What is optimal? Okay. So, but even in a less than optimal, unhealthy state, right? You want to be connected, but you feel irritated and don't want to connect, but you want to be connected. So moving towards social connection, moving towards optimal, that's what we want to do. We don't want to keep isolating. Okay, so once the person engages in the amount of social connection that is optimal for them, from an optimal standpoint of health, to feel full, dopamine returns to baseline. Okay, so this continuum between isolation to social connection, effort is required. Whether it's one tick mark or 3 or 5 or 10 or 15 or 20, doesn't matter to me. One is better than none. Effort is required. We cannot stay isolated and expect to feel connected. The more isolated we are, socially isolated, SI, the more and more we do that, the more irritable and aggressive we become physiologically and in real time. And then the harder it is to connect. The more socially isolated we are, the higher the likelihood that somebody over time is going to consider suicidal ideation possible. I'm not saying that everybody does. I'm just saying that people usually experience that the more and more isolated they are. Social isolation can increase the likelihood of suicidal ideation. We've got to move the other direction towards optimal, towards connection, towards thriving. And not because we quote unquote feel like it in the moment, but because we know that effort is required. It's going to be uncomfortable. It might even be painful, but at long term, it's going to be less painful than staying socially isolated for ourselves and our loved ones, our sisters and brothers, our family, the mission. What we do speaks louder than what we say. What we do or don't do speaks volumes way more than words. So we want to move towards social connection. We want to move towards optimal. We're not going to feel like it. It's not based on feeling like it. It's based on wanting to thrive and to set an example for sisters and brothers, spouses, partners, friends, family, children. Setting an example for thriving. Not because it's easy. There is no easy in this, but because it leads to more and more thriving and health. Okay, so we already talked about these. I'm going to stop sharing and go to the last ORI continuum. Thriving training requires movement. It requires good sleep too. So dopamine on sleep. Optimally, dopamine will be higher earlier in the day and lower towards bedtime as it inhibits melatonin, which helps us sleep. Optimal quantity and quality of sleep restores baseline dopamine, replenishes the dopamine in the pool. Sleep is critical to thriving. It is critical to filling up and fueling our health tanks, filling our physiological pool from which we can pull from for the energy for day-to-day life, for thriving. Lack of quantity and quality of sleep depletes dopamine reserves, leaves a trough, it empties the pool and leaves us in a deficit. Dopamine on ultraviolet rays. So when you take 10 minutes first thing in the morning, 15 to 20 on a cloudy day, and get outside, the sun will help regulate hormone levels, dopamine, cortisol, melatonin, for example, which is key to thriving and health. And then with movement, optimally, dopamine will be higher earlier in the day and lower towards bedtime. Higher levels of dopamine helps us feel energized, helps us focus, helps us feel motivated, and to believe that we can do what we need to do. Self-confidence, self-efficacy, believing we can do what we need to do, and having the confidence to do it. There truly is an ORI continuum response line for everything from pain to gain. Effort is required. And now for the ORI continuum from faith to action. So this is James 2:17. What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, "Go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed," but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. James 2:17. So between faith, the ORI continuum between faith and action, faith to the far left, action to the far right of the continuum. In the middle, effort is required. Effort is required, taking action. Thriving without action is solely surviving. There's an ORI continuum response line for everything. It's not that your feelings don't matter. So remember in the military, if we wanted you to have an emotion or an opinion, we would have issued you one. So that's that military mindset, all or none, survival thinking, go big or go home. It's not that your feelings don't matter, but it's also not the extreme opposite that now your feelings are the only thing that matters, AKA whether you feel like doing what you can and need to do in order to thrive or not. It's about training to utilize the ORI continuum response line between ignoring, numbing out, compartmentalizing feelings to solely focusing on gaining the feeling of having pleasure right now. So from numbed out on the left all the way to feeling 100% pleasure right now. It's not about that either. So that's a continuum in regard to the intensity of feeling anything from numbness to pleasure. Thriving is also about faith in believing beyond where you are to where you want to go, and then taking action to get there. So it's not that feelings don't matter, they do, but they aren't the only thing that matters. So for thriving, we cannot wait to feel like doing what we need to do for those 2 things a day for every tank. We must take action to fuel the tanks because it does influence our dopamine levels, which influences everything from basic needs all the way to these amazing goals that we want to accomplish in day-to-day life for thriving. We've got to leverage dopamine. We've got to leverage our physiology. which means we need to take action for thriving. Everything is going to require action. Moving from pain to gain, 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 effort is required. Moving from isolation to social connection, effort is required. Moving from having faith to taking action, effort is required. Because faith without action is dead, just like knowledge without using that knowledge for our good can actually lead to more harm. If we have knowledge, but we don't act upon that knowledge for our good, that knowledge can actually cause us to be worse off, because now we may detrimentally use it to drill sergeant ourselves and then blame ourselves for being worthless and then feel worthless because we aren't taking action. And the more this happens, the less energy we have to take action and move. So the sooner the better. Movement is required. And a good friend might just show up and pull you out of your bed and off that couch to start walking and taking action for your good, not your demise. Because isolation leads to increased tachykinin, which causes us to be more irritable and aggressive over time. So the longer this goes, the worse it gets. We've got to do the opposite of what we quote unquote feel. Feelings are important, but they aren't the only thing that's important. Knowledge is important, but it's not the only thing that's important. Faith is important, but it's not the only thing that's important. Action is required. Effort is required. You have got to have fuel in your tank to move. So dopamine in the pool means fuel in the tanks. You can visit ori.christinaseymour.com to hear more about different courses that I have that you can sign up for Optimal Response Initiative training. I would love to see you there. In the meantime, I will continue to provide common sense insight and practical application to thriving in day-to-day life. We've got to have the training to know how to thrive, because it's not just important to know how to survive. Go big or go home, suck it up and press on is not enough. If we want to thrive, we've got to move from isolation to connection. We've got to move from pain to gain. And yes, it will be uncomfortable. We've got to move from faith to taking action to manifest that faith for ourselves in our health and our quality of life. So remember, leverage your dopamine, take action. And if the only thing you remember today is to fuel up by doing 2 things a day to fill each tank, If the only thing that you remember is that social isolation is a no-go, because it may increase the likelihood of that extreme thinking and thinking, I can keep sucking it up and pressing it on to survive and live, or to the extreme opposite, I got nothing left to give, and I'm going to go extreme to not living, to suicide, SI, suicidal ideation, the idea of not being here. I'm here to tell you right now that's a no-go. There are options. Consider the ORI continuum response lines. Know that the extremes give us bookmarks, but if we live on those extremes, we paint ourselves in a corner and we feel helpless, hopeless, aggressive, irritable, and as if we've got to choose one of the extremes, as if those are the only options. There are way more options. Sisters and brothers, there are way more options. We live between the extremes in our day-to-day life. Know what the extremes are, but more importantly, know what the continuum is between those extremes. And what direction do you want to move? Do you want to move towards worst on the ORI continuum response line, or do you want to move towards optimal for thriving? Any tick mark, any movement away from worst is going to be better, whether it's lowercase better or capital better. It's going to move you towards optimal on the ORI continuum response line. There is hope. There is healing. There is a way other than go big or go home. Let us all join forces to go big for health, quality of life, and social connection, and taking action for thriving. And on that note, I will say, stay alert, stay alive, and continue to thrive. The training will continue, so I will see you soon. Take care of you, seal your mask, and fuel up.